In 2003, my dad had the honor to introduce John Grisham at the Blumenthal Center as part of the Public Library Centennial. He was so excited about that event. In fact, I believe it was the first time he gave a public speech since getting his ventilator and since he had to learn to talk with his eyes. He wrote that speech by, there it is, it's 2003. Time flies. He spoke by eye for the first time there, meaning he used his eyes to look at the computer to signal the computer to speak his words. So even the heavy weight of this drastic change of life that he had just gone through, nothing could keep him from sharing that stage with John Grisham that night. My dad got that gig because John Grisham, as you heard a little bit about, is close buddies with my Uncle Bubba. Yeah, you haven't met Uncle Bubba yet. It's a friendship born from years of sitting in the left field lounge watching Mississippi State baseball games together. So when the foundation asked me if I'd be willing to introduce John Grisham to you all at dinner tonight, I eagerly accepted, and not just because I wanted to help, but because I have a good story to tell. It's my dad's story, and it not only goes to shed some light on the remarkable career of our guest speaker, but I love telling my dad's stories because it keeps him present. But the first part of the story makes me a little uneasy. So if you think that is a little less than gracious to our speaker today, please remember this is my dad's story. When John Grisham published his first novel, A Time to Kill, it was not popular. You know what? I don't feel comfortable saying this with you sitting right there. So, I'm going to read this part directly from my father's 2003 introduction, so you all know these are his words, not mine. When John wrote his first novel, A Time to Kill, not much of anybody bought it. So, John's friend Bubba bought a crate of books and unloaded them on all his relatives at Christmas. Ours is inscribed, to Joe and Joni, from my beloved friend Bubba. I hope you enjoy it, John Grisham. I didn't expect much from a writer who was so grateful to sell a book he would call Bubba beloved. So who knows what my dad's expectations really were about A Time to Kill? But I can tell you the reality of the situation because I remember the moment my dad began to read A Time to Kill. It was in the afternoon of December 28, 1989. I also remember the moment my dad finished A Time to Kill. It was in the evening of December 28, 1989. He said it had been years since my dad said it had been years since he sat through and read an entire book in a single sitting. But he didn't lift his head up from Time to Kill except for catch his breath and then jump back in. He recognized A Time to Kill as one of the most important and powerful pieces of literature of his generation. The only other story that I'd ever heard my dad talk about with so much reverence was Chariots of Fire. And he really thought that both those stories should be taught in our schools. Now, my dad, only knowing this author as Bubba's buddy, envisioned John Grisham as this young, struggling author, and he didn't want the world to miss out on what he knew would be an extraordinary career. He couldn't bear to think that A Time to Kill might be his only book. That's true. So, on January 4th, a week after he finished A Time to Kill, he sent a letter to John Grisham encouraging him to keep writing. What most struck me, he wrote, was the way you captured the complexity of the forces, racial, political, religious, personal, etc., at work in the relationships without losing the focus or tension in the story. Surely I'll see this story again on film or video. It has all the visual elements to reinforce its literary merit. Now, when my dad would tell this story, at this point, he would get sheepish. And if you know, sheepish is not an adjective that was usually connected to Joe Martin. But he felt silly looking back and for thinking that John Grisham needed his motivation. Because what my dad did not know was that although A Time to Kill did not sell very well as a novel, Hollywood had already decided to make a movie out of it. And what's more is he had already sold the film rights to his second novel, The Firm. He sold the film rights before selling the hardcover rights. So John Grisham had already hit it big, and not just in Mississippi, he hit it big in New York, Hollywood, all over. And then along comes this little note from Bubba's little brother Joe. And it says, keep writing. And be like, dear Stephen Curry. You should keep shooting that. Now, my dad's punchline to that story was always, when I sent the letter to John Grisham, he was an unknown author. But by the time the letter got to John Grisham, he was already booked on Oprah. A Time to Kill went on to be a bestseller and sold 25, 30 million copies. Now, my dad usually told this story in a self-deprecating way because John Grisham is internationally famous. But every now and then I hear him say, but if it weren't for that letter, who knows? So possibly riding the wave of that letter, John Grisham decided to keep writing. He has published 40 books and has sold hundreds of millions of copies. The lineup of those books read like a World Series championship roster. You get A Time to Kill, then The Firm, then Pelican Brief, and The Client, The Chamber goes on, all big hitters. My niece Jane, who is here tonight volunteering, she told me yesterday that her 10-year-old little brother Rivers has decided to go to law school after reading John Grisham's Theodore Boone series about a 13-year-old kid lawyer. Harvard and Yale, right inside, right? So my dad was right. This unknown author has indeed gone on to being one of the most powerful storytellers in the world. My dad taught us fiction is truth, unencumbered by fact, and turned to authors like John Grisham in particular for words about truth in our humanity and how we live with one another. His most recent book is Camino Island. The blurb is a gang of thieves stage a daring heist from a secure vault deep below Princeton University's Firestone Library. Their loot is priceless, but Princeton has insured it for $25 million. Judging by every book he has written, I know we'll be highly entertained, but we'll also learn about truth in our humanity. We're very fortunate to have John Grisham here tonight. Simply by agreeing to be our speaker, he has benefited the Joe Martin ALS Foundation in record-setting fashion. As soon as we announced he was the speaker, the dinner sold out for the first time ever. We've already raised $118,000, nearly double where we were this time last year. And all of that fundraising and awareness is so important because it is very expensive to live with ALS. My dad said, things beyond the reach of most individuals are easily within the grasp of a caring community. Remember, on any given day, any given person can do something towards creating a healing environment. So on behalf of my father and the foundation, thank you, Mr. Grisham, for what you have done for us tonight. It is one of the highlights of my life to say, please welcome John Grisham.
The last time they stood up and cheered was when I announced I was resigning from the Mississippi House of Representatives. My career was over. Thank you, David, for that very generous and colorful introduction. It's way too much, but I enjoyed hearing it. I'm delighted to be in Charlotte. I was here about 6 weeks ago at the Park Road Bookstore selling books. A great independent bookstore. please support it. They're dying rapidly. It was my first book tour in 25 years. I went to 13 cities, 5 of which are in North Carolina. And, had a wonderful time promoting Camino Island, as David talked about. It's a brilliant literary masterpiece. I'm sure you've all read it. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. I made that mistake one time, and I'll never do it again. But I spent a lot of time in North Carolina. My wife is from Raleigh, born there, and she grew up in Mississippi. That's where we met, and then we moved to Virginia 24 years ago. We live in Charlottesville. Our daughter went to school at UNC. She graduated in 2008, and when she graduated, my wife decided that she was going to resume and finish her studies from Ole Miss, and so she transferred into UNC, and for 2 years commuted from Charlottesville. She was not about to go to UVA. She was going to Carolina, and she had near perfect grades, so she transferred in, and for 2 years commuted from Charlottesville to UNC to Chapel Hill. Got her degree in 2010. My daughter lives in Raleigh. She's a Tar Heel. She married a Tar Heel. My wife's a Tar Heel. And in March of last year, my daughter gave birth to a future Tar Heel. My wife's idea of how do you say? My wife's idea of nonprofit fund is to volunteer for various boards and committees on the campus at UNC. So she's in Chapel Hill all the time. We have a house on Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. The grandson had nothing to do with that. We spend a lot of time there, a lot of time in Raleigh, so we have some very deep roots. I have an honorary degree from UNC that I got in 2011, and it's mounted on the wall. And it's really funny because I did nothing to earn it, but it's four times bigger than my wife's, and we have more big blue degree. So I've proven my North Carolina roots. I almost belong here. I went to college at Mississippi State, and that's where I'm from. And State is a small school and a big conference. A big serious conference when it comes to sports. And we learned a long time ago that State has a hard time competing consistently in football and basketball with the likes of our neighbors, Alabama and Auburn, LSU and Tennessee, and big schools with budgets that are 3 and 4 times our budget in State and Ole Miss. It's hard to be competitive over the years, and most of us have learned you can't get too excited about football and basketball at Mississippi State. We compete, we try our best, it's just tough. But we have baseball. We've had baseball for a long time, and it's one of the premier programs in the country. We hold records, I think, for the 4 or 5 largest crowds at a college baseball game, 15,000, 16,000 people. Every year we're in the top 3 or 4 in attendance. The sport is, the fans are rabid, the sport is supported. And at the baseball field there, David mentioned the left field lounge. Beyond the left field fence, there's a slight incline. And when I was a student there, you could park your cars out there and party before the game, barbecue grills. It's become more and more, I hate to use the word sophisticated, but it's now they park these old trucks and trailers. You have to have a permit and a plot to move your old truck in when the season starts, and they build these elaborate benches and seats and barbecue grills, and that's probably steels and everything else out there, but there's a whole lot of food and a whole lot of drink and a whole lot of fun. And during a big baseball weekend, left field is it's a solid wall of probably 5,000 people. And that's where I hung out in college, was the left field lounge. It's been voted many times as the best place in America to watch a college baseball game. When I was there, we were pretty rowdy. If the opposing left fielder is a good guy that has a sense of humor, he can take food back to the dugout. Hot dogs, ribs, barbecue chicken, pots of gumbo, you name it. There's so much food left, you can't believe all the food out there. And at times the barbecue smoke is so thick, you can't see the game. That's the left field lounge. If the opposing left fielder has a bit of an attitude, he's in for a long weekend. I once threw a hot dog at the left fielder for LSU, and missed him. He saw it though, and I later met him. Years ago, we were having a big laugh. His name is Paul Maneri. He is now the head coach at LSU. So it's a pretty wild place. And I was there one time over 30 years ago, watching a big series, sitting on the back of a truck that I had a partial interest in. I had to pay for it. And a friend of mine said, "You see that guy down there by the grill? His name is Bubba." There are quite a few Bubbas in the left field lounge. I looked at Bubba, and he was a nice-looking guy. Had a cap on and had a tall cup in one hand with some illegal beverage, I'm sure. In his other hand, he had like a barbecue chicken leg or something. He was kind of at the fence watching the game. Not a completely impressive sort of guy. And my friend said, Bubba's brother is the governor of North Carolina. And I said, "Yeah, so is mine." So is mine. How about it? We were not too impressed. Later we met Bubba and we hung out with him many, many times. And once I found out his son, Michael, was the ace reliever for the state baseball team, Bubba went up several notches in our book. Forget his brother. We didn't care about his brother being governor. His son was pitching for the Bulldogs. And Bubba and I spent 3 years, at least, in the left field lounge, watching baseball games, long weekends. The regionals were always fun. Mississippi State hosted a regional every year, and teams would come in from all over the country. And it was a lot of fun. We would always get word to the clubhouse boys for the other teams. If the other teams weren't playing that night, would say, "Come to the left field lounge and we'll feed you and have a good time." And we sat out in the left field with kids from Michigan and UCLA. And the BYU kids tried to pay us for the food. They really did. They wanted to pay us for our barbecue. They wouldn't drink any beer. Of course, it's illegal. Most of the other teams did drink the beer. And there's a lot of it. We had so many wonderful times out there, and that's where our friendship and with Bubba and Jackie goes back to, I guess, 1986 was Michael's first year, 86, 87, 88, so a long way back. Bubba didn't know I was writing books or writing a novel, but Bubba was there almost from the beginning. When A Time to Kill came out, David tried to put it nicely, but the book flopped. Total flop. They printed 5,000 hardback copies, and I bought 1,000 of them. Trying to make something happen. The story was, something I had lived with for a long time. It was basically very autobiographical. It was my story because I was living that life as a small town lawyer in Mississippi, struggling with a beautiful young wife and babies, and dreaming of being a big trial lawyer and dreaming of the big trial where you get a big courtroom scene with a big crowd, and that was where I was going. That was my goal, was to be a big time trial lawyer at the age of 30, and I was on my way. I was trying a lot of cases, and what I would do back then, if a big trial was underway, I would be in the courtroom. I'd watch good lawyers, and if a really good lawyer was coming to town to try a case, I would be there. I would watch him. I would hang out with him. I just lived it. And I was in a courtroom one day watching a trial that I was not involved in because I was just curious, and as an officer of the court, I always had access to the courtroom, and I was there when something happened that changed my life. And it was a really horrible case that had electrified our community because this young girl had been raped and brutalized and left for dead, and they caught the guy who did it. And it was time for the trial. He refused to plead guilty, and he wanted his day in court. And I knew her family. Again, it's a small town, and her father was not, I didn't know him well, but I knew him and knew his family, and they were nice people, but not the kind of folks you'd want to start trouble with. And so there was this tension in the town, in the county, in the courtroom, when the man who had left her for dead was on trial. And security was tight. And it was a real pressurized, tense environment. And I was in the courtroom when they brought her in. She was 12 years old to testify. And the judge, my mentor, was a very smart man and been on the bench for a long time. He knew how bad things were going to be. He did something I had never seen before or since. He vacated the courtroom. He made all the spectators leave, and it was a big courtroom. There were a lot of people there. He banished everybody from the courtroom. And he put deputies at the doors and said, no one's going to hear this, okay, but the people who have to hear it. And it was an empty courtroom. But again, as an officer, I could stay in the courtroom. There were a few clerks, the lawyers, the defendant, and the jury. And they brought her in. And it was really difficult to listen to. At times she was very brave, at times she was very frail, at times she was fragile. In 2 hours, she took us through every emotion known to the human soul. From outright hatred, like I'd never felt before, and hadn't felt since, to love and compassion and courage, and it was amazing what we went through. At times, I was standing across the courtroom from a jury. There were 14 jurors, 12 and 2 alternates, and I knew 2 of the ladies on the jury. And it was amazing to see all 14 of them crying. The judge was hiding his face, the lawyers were hiding their eyes, the prosecutor, who could cry at will because he was a prosecutor, he was weeping. The defense lawyer was court appointed, a buddy of mine who couldn't get out of the case. Nobody wanted the case. Nobody wanted the case. Somebody had to take it. It was amazing and awful. And finally, she couldn't continue, and we all needed a break. So the judge said, "Okay, let's take a recess." And everybody fled. The jurors got out of the room, and the judge disappeared. And I left. I went out the side door, down the back, to my courtroom. I knew all the little angles and secret rooms. And I got out of the courtroom, and I almost ran to my car. Got to my car as fast as I could, and I realized that I had left my briefcase in the courtroom. So I had to go back after it. So I went back in the back door and up the side stairway to another room, and there I was in the courtroom. And I walked right by the defendant, who was just sitting there. And this is a guy that was so a long-time felon, you could not describe this guy. He was an animal. And he was sitting there. He was the only one there, except for a deputy who was guarding him. He was standing a few feet away, and there was nobody else in the courtroom. The whole thing was empty. And I walked right by the defendant to get my briefcase. And I thought, this courtroom is the courthouse is in a lockdown. I just walked in, nobody stopped me, and there he is, right there. There's the defendant. Had that been my daughter, okay, at that moment, and I had a gun, I would do what I had to do as a father, and I would look at that jury and say, okay, what are you going to do with me? I just did what you all want to do. And it was overwhelming. It was overwhelming, the thought. And I've never forgotten it, because I will not let myself forget it, how powerful the moment was. The desire for retribution, the desire for blood justice, the desire for... And I got out of there. I drove home, and I became obsessed with this story of a courtroom drama where a father gets his retribution and everybody's happy. Everybody's happy. And I changed a few facts, and I thought, I was 30 years old. It was fall of 1985. I had never written anything but some bad legal briefs and pleadings and things like that I had to write. I had never studied writing. I never thought about being a writer. I knew I could handle the language because I'd always been able. I was never afraid to write. I could always get good grades on papers and things like that. But I just became obsessed with this story, this courtroom drama, as seen through the eyes of a young attorney, much like myself. And so finally I said, okay, I'm going to try to write. And late one night after my wife and our little son had gone to bed, I stayed up late and I took a legal pad and I wrote chapter 1. What happens, what in chapter 1? And my wife is an English major, and she read a whole lot more back then, but she read all types of books and we both loved to read. And after a few weeks of that, very timidly I said, hey, I've got something I'd like for you to read. And she said, what have you done now? It's chapter 1 of the book. I would like for you to read it, okay? She said, okay. I was so nervous, I gave it to her, and I went outside and walked around the block to get out of the house. And I came back after, an hour, and I said, what do you think? She said, I like it. I'd like to read some more. I said, okay, I'll go write some more. That's all I got. I got one chapter. And that started this process. It went on for 3 years, almost 3 years of chapter by chapter. I would write on a legal pad. I always had the current legal pad with me wherever I went. And those legal pads, Bubba, are at the library at Mississippi State. They're preserved, okay? I kept them. That's where all my stuff gets stored these days, all my junk. But it took a 3-year period of time, working almost every day to finish the first. I had no idea what I was doing. When I finished, the manuscript was 1,000 pages long, and as I realized I was going to finish it, I began thinking about, the natural instinct as to what about getting it published. And so I started reading all these magazine articles and books about how to get published. I read one book I'll never forget. The book is called Hardback: How to Become a Best-Selling Author, written by a guy who never sold anything. I bought it, $20. I bought the book, I bought all this stuff. And so I began, this submission rejection thing, back and forth to New York, and there were a lot of rejections. Which is part of the process. My first rejection letter was a personal note from a senior editor at Doubleday, my long-term publisher since the firm. And the guy wrote me a personal note. He was very nice and said nice things. He said, but it's not quite right for us or whatever. They have 15 different reasons to say no. But it was a very nice, and I couldn't wait to take it home. I said, Renee, look, this great rejection letter I got today. The rejection letters kind of made the mail fun. I always had, my secretary would take the first 3 chapters, the cover letter, and a letter a synopsis, and a letter to the agent, a list of 30 agents, a list of 30 publishers. And so as one came back, a rejection, she would just strike it off, redo the letter, and send it back to New York. And I always had like 10 floating around somewhere in New York. So the rejection letters were coming rapidly. They say no real fast. And after about, I don't know, 50, I was in the state legislature. I came home one weekend and went by the office late Friday, got the mail. There were some rejection letters, and I went home. Renee was cooking dinner, and we were talking. I had to be gone all week to the state capitol. And I said, I got a bunch of rejection letters this week, usual stuff. And she said, I'm really sorry to hear that. And we talked about it, and she said, you're sending the first 3 chapters. Those are not really the 3 best chapters in the book. Why don't you send chapter 1 where that happened, chapter 4 where that happened, and chapter 7 where that happened? And I said, well, that's pretty stupid. Who wants to read 3 chapters at random? She said, well, you're not doing so hot, with the first 3 chapters. I said, sure, why not? This is a game. This is a hobby. It's a little hobby. Nobody knows about the 2 of us. And so I did what she said. I took chapters 1, 4, and 7. We sent those out to the next 5 agents. And within a week, 3 of them had called wanting to represent me. So I couldn't wait to go home and tell her, once more she was right about that. When A Time to Kill came out in the summer of 1989, I was, again, a struggling small-town lawyer with no money, but I had more money than my publisher. It was a small press in New York that went bankrupt the following year. And they had no money to promote the thing, so I had this idea where we didn't have a great bookstore in our hometown, but there was a nice library. It's a suburb just outside of Memphis where I grew up in Mississippi. And so I went to my librarian and I said, hey, first novel coming out, let's throw a big book party. And because I was so popular there, that's where I grew up. I've been a lawyer there for 6 or 7 years. I'd been elected and re-elected to the state legislature there. And I knew I could draw a crowd, even to come buy a book. So I had 1,000 copies of the book that I bought myself. I had an invoice coming due for those books, and I was going to make some money retail and some more so back in royalties, I had it all figured out. And we actually have pictures of my kids climbing on 1,000 copies of A Time to Kill. Stacked them all around, and we had a huge book party. Excuse me. And a nice crowd showed up, childhood friends, church friends, but not enough friends. And when the book party was over, I still owned 882 copies of A Time to Kill. And again, the invoice was coming, okay, and I was broke. And so I panicked, and I went to my librarian, and I said, hey, buddy, I can take this show on the road, and do you have any other friends? He said, sure, I have librarians all over the state. And that's when I did a very smart thing, because I was desperate. I went to all these libraries with a trunk load of A Time to Kill, and finally sold most of them. I went to Meridian with Bubba and Jackie, went to the junior college there. Bubba indeed had a crate. He had piles of books for all of his family. For those of you family members who resent getting those books, a hardback today is worth about $4,000. Okay, so you have Bubba and don't sell them. We finally paid off the invoice and got rid of the books. I kept about 50. I buried in the backyard. They're still in boxes, and I'll buy them occasionally. By the time I finished Time to Kill, by the time the book came out, thank you so much. I was finished with my second novel. My second novel was based on something that really happened in law school. Not to me, I was not heavily recruited out of law school. Much to your surprise, those of you who read The Firm. But one of my good friends was the top student in our class, and he would go off. I didn't want to go to work with a big firm. I wanted to go back to my hometown, where I was from, try to get a job with a law firm. If not, I was going to run for the state legislature, and that's where I wanted to live. Okay, my wife was from there too. So I didn't interview with law firms in law school. But my buddy was the top student. And he would go off for interviews in Memphis and New Orleans and regional Atlanta, Houston, places like that. And he would come back after every visit and tell us all about this firm and all the things they were offering, the salaries, the perks, and it sounded great. He came back from one visit. He said, that was a weird law firm. I got the impression that once you join that firm, you never leave. It's kind of like it was owned by the mafia or something. Well, that stuck, okay? And 7 or 8 years later, as I was finished The Time to Kill, shipped it off to New York. And one night I was talking to Renee, and I said, look, I got a pitch for you. Here's the idea. And I still do this 30 years later. Here's the idea for the book. Listen to it. And it better be a good pitch. It better be a good catch, or it's not going to work. And that's true with any story. And I said, here's the idea. Young lawyer goes to work for a law firm, blah, blah, blah. And Renee froze. She said, wait a minute. Say that again. So I pitched the firm to her the second time over dinner. And she said, that's a big book. That can work. That can be more commercial, a lot more commercial than your first book. That's a big book. I wrote a 2-page synopsis and sent it to my editor and my agent in New York, and he had the same reaction. So I'd been working on The Firm as we were trying to get Time to Kill published. And when The Firm came out in 1991, it became a bestseller, right off the bat, and changed everything overnight for us. And we really haven't slowed down since then. When the book came out, when it hit the New York Times list, which is a big deal for any new writer, they pulled me back to New York for another round of publicity. This is March, April of 1991. You can believe that, 26 years ago. I did Bryant Gumbel, NBC Today show, which is a big deal for any new author. And we were having lunch one day with some, remember the old Walden bookstores and B. Dalton? In every mall, those are the stores I grew up with. I grew up around malls. We didn't have great bookstores. And there was a young Walden Books executive sitting to my left, and we were just talking about stuff. He was as young as I was. And he said something that greatly influenced my career. He said, talking about writers and bestsellers, he said the big guys come out every year. Well, I had never thought about that. I mean, I was such a rookie. And I said, really? He said, yeah, look at your big names. Stephen King, Robert Ludlum, Sidney Sheldon, Michael Crichton, whoever it was, but Tom Clancy. He said, those guys come out every year. The big guys come out every year. And I thought, hey, I want to be a big guy. I want to be a big guy. So I hustled back home and I wrote the Pelican Brief in 45 days. And got it published in 1992 and got in the habit of writing the book every year. And it's something that I've been able to do ever since. As the years have gone by, after writing 10 or 12 legal thrillers, I began to think, can I write something else? In addition to the legal, I'll never get too far away from the legal thrillers because for obvious reasons. They're still very popular. And I've already written one for this year, for the fall. But I thought, okay, I'm going to write a book about a childhood memoir, Painted House. That was very autobiographical. I love sports. I kept waiting for the baseball book. I love baseball. I kept waiting for the great baseball story, and I couldn't find it. And I had 2 football books along the way. There was I think I'm really funny, and so I wanted to write a comic novel, and so I wrote a book about skipping Christmas that I thought was, my chance to really, really be funny. And it sort of worked. I've written, one nonfiction book called The Innocent Man about wrongful convictions. I'm still on the board of the Innocence Project in New York, and that's work that I take very seriously, and I love those stories as sad as they are. And I think I'll continue to do that. I'm writing a kids series now. If I see an issue or see a story, Camino Island was not, there's no lawyers in it. I tried to write a whole book with no lawyers, and I got down to the very end and had to have a lawyer. And I put him in for 2 pages and got him off the scene, okay? So I'll probably continue to do that as I mature. I still enjoy what I do immensely. The legal thrillers are so much fun to take an issue, whether it's death penalty or wrongful convictions or mass incarceration or sentencing disparities, or there's a whole long list of things that are wrong with our legal system and judicial system and penal system that need to be addressed, not necessarily by me, but that's where I come from. Those are the stories I enjoy. Those are the issues I like to write about. And I think the best books are the ones where I take an issue, whatever it is. The book I'm finishing for the fall is about student debt, the student debt crisis. And you take that and you weave a legal thriller around it, and you get people sucked into the story and turning pages, and maybe you get them to think about an issue that they haven't thought about before. To me, those are the good books. After about 3 or 4 of those, my wife will say, please stop preaching, get off the soapbox, and just go write something fun. Okay, so that's where Camino Island comes from. I can't see slowing down anytime soon. It's still very enjoyable, and I'm very thankful to people like you who buy the books and enjoy the books and make all this worthwhile. So I want to say thanks to you. One story, I grew up, again, a huge baseball fan, and I love the story of Lou Gehrig. I love the famous movie, The Luckiest Man Alive. I'm not sure, is that Gary Cooper? Yeah, Gary Cooper. So I knew a little bit about the disease when I was in the state legislature 30 some odd years ago. There was a former member who had served for a long time. His name was Butch Lambert. And Butch at that time was chairman of the State Tax Commission in Jackson. And he was also one of the senior SEC football officials working at that time. Huge, magnificent storyteller. And we would meet at 5 o'clock every morning at a certain restaurant where we stayed, the motel next to the Capitol. A bunch of us would be around a big round table. And these guys would tell stories. These veteran politicians from all over the state gathered there in the state capitol for 3 months every year. They knew each other, they were longtime friends, and they would bring these stories to the table. And it was some of the richest stuff I'd ever heard. I wish I'd taken notes. But Butch was by far the best storyteller of all. And he was a very charismatic guy. He was the head official. What's the head referee called in a football game? Referee? Umpire? Not the umpire. Referee. Crew chief. He's the main man. Okay? And he was calling the game, the 1978 Gator Bowl, Ohio State versus Clemson, when Clemson picked off a pass late in the game to seal the win, and the linebacker ran out of bounds on the Ohio State side, and Woody Hayes slugged him. Famous game, okay? It was Woody Hayes' last game. They had to fire him. I mean, he had no choice but to fire him. He was kind of over the hill anyway. Well, Butch Lambert was the referee in the middle there, and he tells a story about how Danny Ford, the Clemson coach, who was, let's say, rather emotional on a good day, wanted to charge the field and go beat up Woody Hayes. And Butch had to negotiate this truce in the middle of the game, okay? And he told Danny, he said, look, you got the game won. Score 17-15. You got the ball. You can burn the clock. Just be cool. Don't blow it, okay? You got the game won. We'll deal with Woody Hayes. But anyway, he tells this beautiful story. He goes, and that's just one of his stories. He could do these stories forever. Later, when they realized that my first novel was coming out, I'd walk into a room, everybody would go silent. I was not allowed to speak because I was a rookie. I mean, there was a real pecking order back then. But Butch Lambert was the dean of storytellers around the morning coffee, and we just loved the guy. Came in one weekend, one Tuesday morning. We always drove down on Monday to start the session, and Butch wasn't there. And somebody said Butch has ALS and Lou Gehrig's disease, and we sort of knew what that meant. And he was probably 60 years old and robust and active and charismatic, and he showed up the next day and as if nothing was wrong, and nobody mentioned it, but he went down really fast, and it wasn't long before he had a cane and a wheelchair, and I think he lasted about 6 months, but it was my first brush with this disease. So that's my story as far as ALS is concerned. I thoroughly enjoyed meeting Joe in 2003. He had written me another letter inviting me to come, and I don't recall getting the letter that David mentioned, encouraging me to write. That sounds like Joe, and I thank you, and I thank you so much for what you do, because when you're facing something like this, it means a lot to talk to people who've been there before and who know what's going to happen, the stages, and the ones who can offer support. So I admire you. I'm delighted to be here. Thank y'all so much.